Peggy, that was wonderful. I can see a few tummies are rumbling, but those of you who are sitting happily for another 10 minutes, we're happy to have some questions. Would anybody like to ask a question?
There's a
microphone here and here.
Good, we can eat.
It looks like oh no, here's a question. Yes. Would you like to come up to one of the microphones?
And there's someone in the back.
There's someone in the back, I'm sorry. Would you like to introduce yourself and start first?
Oh yeah, hi. My name's Anna Barbioli. I was interested in your quote from Michael Kirby about judicial independence. I saw something on the TV a couple of weeks ago, which was just a short item which came from PBS originally, in the US, I think, and it was talking about a Supreme Court judge, I think, who's retiring and has been there, I think, a couple of decades. What it was saying was that at the time that he was appointed, he was seen to be conservative or towards that end of the spectrum, and now he's seen to be relatively moderate or somewhere like that in the middle. So what they were saying is that the whole, there's been a trend towards a more conservative judiciary in the US over some years. I'm just wondering how you think that's sort of a trend where judges are appointed to some perhaps unstated sort of political criterion, how that sits with the question of judicial independence.
Well, I think you're talking about Justice Stevens, who is one of our Supreme Court justices who just announced his retirement. That's happened over and over again. Earl Warren, who was our Chief Justice, was a tough law and order district attorney from my county. He then became governor of California and had made a deal with the president, stepping down to challenge him in the primary, and the president agreed to appoint him to the next Supreme Court opening, which was supposed to be an old guy of no consequence and ended up being the Chief Justice. So that's the political process by which Earl Warren became our Chief Justice. He was the one who presided over a very important case you may have heard of called Brown versus Board of Education, which was the school integration case that found deliberate discrimination by the schools against African Americans. So here is this tough law and order guy who, when presented with this issue, made a decision. The truth is, there's politics in getting to be almost anything in government. But with the judiciary and an independent judiciary, what that means is you are free to call them as you see them, as long as you follow the law, as long as you do your homework and you're diligent and do all the things you're supposed to do, and sort of the politics be damned. And when there was an attempt by President Roosevelt to do away with that, he was so upset by the Supreme Court continuing to knock down his policies that were trying to get us out of the Depression in the 30s, his New Deal policies I'm sure you've heard of. He instituted a court packing plan where he was going to put 5 more members of the Supreme Court. And everybody in the country went nuts and said, you can't do that. So that's what I think an independent judiciary means is whatever you started out, there's something about wearing those robes, having the majesty, really the majesty of the position, that you know you are committed to do a good job, do it fairly and without regard of what the public thinks, what your appointing agency thinks, or even what your mother thinks. My mother once in a while would call me up and give me heck for some decision I had made. And I'd say, well, Mother, it didn't work for all those years you tried to change my mind. It's certainly not going to work now.
Thank you. Yes, you do.
My name's Helen McEwen. I'm interested in the comments you made about the design of prisons, especially with respect to more light and making them more humane and more amenable to rehabilitation in the prison. Some time ago, my daughter, who's an architect, said that she was working on a prison for South Australia. And I said, oh, that must be really exciting. Just think of all the things you could do. And I started talking about rehabilitation and light and what have you. And she said, no, Mum, it's not like that. The design brief is really restrictive. There's not much scope for architects. And I'm wondering, why can't there be a consultation process between the architects and the prisoners, such as the chap who wrote to you, and people who work in prisons and people who work in rehabilitation?
Well, of course there can be. And there's a prison in Austria that's probably the prettiest place you've ever seen. If you go to the New York Times website, nytimes.com, and top type in glass prison Austria, you will see the prettiest place, and they have fabulous programs, and they've been very successful with that. So there's no reason in the world why people couldn't consult. And of course you would still have classifications, of course you would still have security as your primary concern, but there's a way to do that that's not dreary and awful and institutional green that seems so many of our prisons are. I went to the women's prison because I was particularly concerned about the conditions for women, and I went to James Nash House. What happens in James Nash House is there aren't enough forensic beds, so the people who have been adjudicated too ill to stand trial are taken to the prisons and put in solitary confinement because otherwise they get preyed upon by the general population. It's just absolutely untenable. So yes, there can be consultation, and as you notice, the Premier has called for more public input and consultation, and that's why I was talking about having input to this overall justice plan. So if that's of particular concern, look for the enacting of those recommendations where the public will have the input and be able to help make decisions about the shape of the justice system here in SA.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, I've ducked down from upstairs. I was just wondering, Peggy, do you have any opinion between whether there's a link between the recidivism rate?
That's a hard word, isn't it? Recidivism.
It's actually an area I work in, so I should be able to pronounce it. It's just the nerves. Increasing the knowledge of the justice system and the link to repeat offenders.
And the link to what, I'm sorry?
Is there a link to repeat offending through a lack of knowledge of the justice system, in your opinion?
Is there a link to reoffending to a lack of knowledge of the justice system?
Yep.
I don't think so. I mean, just because you don't know the difference between Moe and Curly doesn't make you a criminal. I cannot see any connection to that. But maybe I'm just lacking imagination tonight.
Thank you. Yes.
Ruth Russell from the Human Rights Coalition. Over the last few years, there have been laws brought in the federal level and now again in the state level that specifically override human rights. And I'm just wondering that once the laws seem to come into place, they seem to be accepted and there doesn't seem to be much review of it. And we know today, and I'm not up to date with what's happened, the current situation with the South Australian bikies law, which takes away free association. So I'm just concerned about the increasing amount of law that overrides human rights, because you probably realise we don't have a human rights bill either in the state or the federal government, and we don't know what's happening with that. So it's a little bit scary, I think, for people who are concerned about human rights to see them being legislated away in an era of fear, because these people have got to be controlled, and that's the only way we can handle it.
Well, of course, I don't know the specific laws about which you're speaking, but certainly there is no reason in the world why laws can't be changed, as I mentioned earlier, and if enough people are concerned, they will be, because that's how change happens, is people banding together and going to the policymakers and saying, this is what we want. That may sound a little Pollyanna, but that's the way it's always been made, and it always will be, that enough people who want that will do it. I must say that compared to the United States, I know most of you are horrified that we still have the death penalty, for instance. Your stand on human rights is much better than ours. So I think you're spoiled in your standards, but that's good that you have them, absolutely.
It's still not enough.
I understand.